How many of you been to this class before? Oh, right. That's good. Then you I can tell all my same jokes again. Well, to start off with, I did want to tell you a story. A young lawyer opened his new office and was delighted to see a client waiting for him. He asked, "How may I help you?" The client, a farmer, replied, "I want a divorce." The lawyer said, "Well, let's see if you have a case." "No," said the farmer, "I have a John Deere." "What I mean is, do you have a suit?" "Sure I have a suit," said the farmer. "I wear it to church every Sunday." The lawyer tried to gain other information with, "Do you have a grudge?" "Yes, I have a grudge. That's where I keep my John Deere," answered the farmer. "I'm looking for a cause for a divorce. For example, does she beat you up?" "Oh, no, I get it before she does," said the farmer. "Then tell me, why do you want a divorce?" "My wife and I have a problem with communication." The point is, in trying to communicate some of what I do in orchard production, you will have to translate what you hear and see to your own circumstances, and my choice of structure and words may not always be the best. I want to share this quote from the Book of Education. "Every human being created in the image of God is endowed with a power akin to that of the Creator. Individuality, power to think and to do. I give this to express that we each have our God-given individual thinking and ability to use. There are a lot of individual details in your circumstances. Glean what you can from this and many other sources and apply them to yours. Just because I do things a certain way doesn't mean it will be the same for you. It sometimes takes years to decide certain ways to do things based on circumstances, crops, spacing, money, farming philosophy, education, to name a few." With so many avenues to go down on this topic of orcharding, I plan primarily to go through my seasons for sugar plums, prunes, fall, winter, spring, summer, and certain aspects of other orchards because it may be helpful to cover a broader range. I recommend using your local university extension office or ag advisor for research and filter that with your own knowledge and ideas. Now, there are many resources available online. It's hard to miss getting lots of information, but also misinformation. Find someone with experience in your area. Visit other farms and farmers. Even where I live, what I do may not translate exactly to someone who farms in the dirt in the foothills just 15 miles away. Many times I think much of what I do is simple enough to be called farming for dummies. At least that is how I feel about certain aspects of what I do. What I present may not satisfy your interests or needs. I will try to keep this short enough to give time for questions. I would like to be more candid in my presentation, but in the essence of time, I will stick mostly to my words, and I'll try to allow some time for interaction. I'd like to have questions as we go along, but they had said, hey, could we do questions at the end? And basically, I'm here to serve and to share within the realm of my experience. This is just a picture of our prunes. So just to maybe you wonder, sometimes people ask, well, what's the difference between prunes and plums? And I've grown up growing prunes my whole life. So it's just been part of my life. We always call them prunes. Prunes, prunes, prunes. Prune trees, prunes on the tree, prunes off the tree, whatever, they're prunes. But a while back, the marketing group in California said, or I guess, yeah, California's where most of the prunes are grown, said, hey, we're not selling as many prunes. What can we do to sell more prunes? So they went to the consumer, and said, do you like these better, these prunes, dried prunes, or do you like these dried plums better? Well, most people like dried plums better. So they started to call them dried plums. The same thing. I didn't say most people, but maybe certain groups. So here's the circle. Now, just in the last few years, so we have a bargaining association, prune bargaining association, which markets the prunes. and we pay fees to advertise and all that stuff. They just went back to prunes again. They said, look, we're going to embrace prunes. So now they went back and called them prunes. Now it's the new slogan is, hopefully you've seen this, probably you haven't, it's prunes for life. That's the new California slogan, prunes for life. And I think it's pretty good, because, you eat prunes for your life and eat them your whole life, right? Well, of course. See, she knows. So anyway, this is the fresh on the tree, in the bin, and after they're dried.
Do you lay them out on the ground like raisins to dry?
No, but I'm going to get into that a little bit. Just wondering how we dry those. Hopefully, it won't be till probably the second hour. Of trying to leave time for questions at the end of this time. So just a picture of a little contrast. I farm with organic production methods, which has its benefits and downsides, as conventional ag does as well. I am just showing you what I do. I'm not disparaging anyone's methods. There's a wide range of tools and methods if you aren't tied to any self-production or market rules. This is a picture of conventionally grown peaches, California peaches. I helped my brother produce these in a separate operation than mine. This is an award we received from the California Canning Peach Association. This is as it states, awarded annually to recognize the association member with the highest quality deliveries statewide, and this was our peaches. So you can use many methods to produce a good crop. So it just shows you a picture of what we've done with our. We grow peaches too, and this is some of our conventional peaches. And they gave it, I was pretty impressed. I thought, well, that's pretty good for the state. So now I'm kind of stepping into our process. In the fall, after harvest, I will put on at least one, maybe two irrigations. I will then take out dead trees or push out a whole orchard if I'm starting a new one. Then prep the ground before the winter rain starts. So here's just a picture. I'm going to try out this new gizmo. See if you like this. So here's my grandkids right here, and they're opening the gate helping me open the gate to irrigate my walnuts in the back. So that's just show them put on water, get a dead tree. So we're taking these out in the fall. This is my little tractor with the brush rake, so we're pushing them out. Just infrequent trees that we can take out in the fall after harvest. Next slide. So generally, if I'm starting a new orchard, I will plant a rotation crop for a season or several years. That will be something like wheat, safflower, hay, or vegetable crop. Then I will be back to rip, level, and prep the ground for an orchard. During that time, I can pull soil samples and add amendments and plan my irrigation system. So here's my, we had planted a little block of grass, hay, one summer after vegetables, and we're going to put it in an orchard pretty soon. So here's the planter, and here's our hay crop that my grandson out there, and then some wheat we grew, and then this is just an example of, this is not my equipment, but this is an example of, I was just driving down the road one day, and my neighbor was out ripping some ground, and so I stopped and took some pictures. So this is just one of the aspects of what we do sometimes. Sometimes I'll hire a deal like this to come in if we're going behind especially walnuts, which have a lot of heavy roots left in the ground. We'll go in, rip it up, and pull out the roots. In my case, this is just a picture of showing what's done in our area, and many times that's what people do after an orchard comes out. I don't have that type of equipment, but I'll hire it sometimes. Let's see, anything else on that? Okay, so yeah, this is more my style. This is my tractor, and a little subsoiler. If I have a little deep ripping to do, I use something like this with a cultipacker. So if the area is large, I will use a local surveyor to lay out the orchard grid and an irrigation supplier to plan the irrigation system. This is important to calibrate if going into drip-type irrigation. Pressure, flow, trees water needs at summer peak to get all that stuff right. Neither one is needed if you have the time and knowledge to do a combination of both. Sometimes, because at times I'm putting both together to fit my needs. So, if some of you guys might have an engineering degree or something, you can do all that work yourself. this is the guy that I hired. He's been around. His dad, I knew his dad, and now he's doing surveying work in the community. So he comes out and he helps me set my main points for the grid. He doesn't set up each tree spot. So what we do, he'll set up and say every 200 feet and put a marker in. And then what we will do is we'll take and I just dip these in some whitewash paint so I can see them in the field. And then we set up a cable rather than tape, because he uses a steel cable as well, because you want something that's not going to stretch. Because when you go a long distance, pretty soon, you're going to be off. You want it to be right on. And so then we paint up our stakes, and then we take and mark a cable, and we put a mark where every tree is going to go. We pick a little cable clamp, put a little ribbon on so you can see it when it's dragging through the dirt, and then we stretch it with these. We welded a foot place on here and a foot place on there. We just poke those in the ground. We pull them back to stretch the cable, and then we put the one end on what his mark that he's put in, and everything else we just go through with the stakes and buckets like the crew up here, and we fill in with our tree markers. So that marks our trees. In this case, I was doing a smaller block, so we did use the tape here, and it didn't have to be as perfect. So then we're just going with buckets. We're putting in all our stakes in. This is an irrigation adaptation to suit my needs. I recently set up an drip irrigation system with all buried hoses, so I could mow and control weeds without hoses or emitters to get in the way. Though most of my irrigation is flood from a canal system, which I'll show you later. So this is just showing you a little bit of aspects of, putting in our main line, and you can see here's where we finally got our tree markers in, so we marked our trees. So then we knew where to put our drip line. And then I just have a little tool I pull behind my tractor. That's me on the tractor. And we're just guiding those into the ground. We're shanking that underground. So here you can see the tube then that's the next slide. So we put our tubing underground, and that's just showing how we do that. That's about 9 inches, I think, in this case, somewhere in that range. Whatever. I'll show you this next slide. You'll see. So this is what I set up primarily for weed control while my trees are young. As my trees get older, I prefer to move to a different system of irrigation, more beneficial to the long-term biological system of production using flood irrigation. So I'm placing this is a little pressure compensating emitter. So if my pressure is high at my pump, this compensates for it and only allows a certain amount of gallons per minute or hour or whatever you set this up. These are color-coded by, I think, probably gallons per minute or per hour. I can't remember, probably per hour. And these are the drippers. If I left it just to drip there, I get root intrusion. So there's a guy who makes these whole systems, and this really set it up nice for me because I was doing my homemade stuff before this. And then this just, it's like a sponge hose, lets the water seep into the ground after the emitter, so that way I can bury this thing and I don't get root intrusion into my emitter. And so then I just tied it into my underground line, and I built a little jig so I can know exactly where the emitter is. And this is the right size tube to make big enough to get this other tube in the ground like this. And in hindsight, I would have lifted this up a little bit. I put it a little bit too deep. I didn't want water coming to the surface because I didn't want weeds to grow. But in hindsight, now that I'm mowing and don't worry about the young trees, I'd like the water to come up a little bit so when I'm irrigating, I can go, okay, they're getting water. Because now I got to, sometimes you go out there and think everything's dry on top. And you think, oh, no, is it getting water? So I don't keep this as a long-term system because that's true. All the ground out here will stay dry with a drip system. I like to move eventually to a flood system so my water inundates the whole ground and I get good biological activity through my whole profile of my soil, not just around the tree where the drip is. If you're doing chemical irrigation, chemical fertilizer, sometimes you can get away with this, and a lot of guys are going to all drip. I like the flood, and we have good water in Northern California. We fairly cheap still, and oh yeah, it's going to just everywhere. Yeah, that's the difference. And I don't know if I bring this up here or later. That's the difference in my system. I plan way ahead of time for my weed control. So when I did my walnut orchard, I might get into that a little bit. I did a similar system, but I didn't have this type of dripper. And so because if I can control my water around my trees, I can control my weeds when they're little. After they're big, I don't worry too much because I can mow, and I'll show you some of that stuff. So I'm trying to, it takes time to think through all these aspects of how I'm going to manage things, from row spacing, soil type, pruning styles, root stocks, and equipment I'm going to use because of tree size and the kind I'm planting. For example, most of my prune orchards are between 16 and 20 feet apart. I can get away with a narrower spacing in the row if most of my equipment is driving through the width. So in the row, I may make it 16 feet and 18 or 20 for the width. My walnuts are 24 by 28 to allow for more room for bigger trees. The tree's use of sunlight is a major factor, filling the space well but not too much to allow sunlight as the tree sizes. I consider more width in other equipment such as harvesters to allow room and efficiency of time as much as possible. So if I'm driving, my main drive row is my width. So I can get my equipment through. In the row, I can put them closer together because I'm not trying to get between those as much going crossways. So in this case, with my walnuts, you need room for equipment. Here's this isn't the harvester we use now, but we did this year a little bit. This is pretty long equipment, and then this is my prune harvester. So this, you need some width in here to get this equipment. Plus, you're trying to catch all the fruit off as the tree gets big, to catch that full canopy. Sometimes you get some fruit jumping over the side here, so you need, width to catch all that. And then, of course, this is a 12-foot mower. We've got 10-foot. So you just, depending on what kind of size equipment, how much ground you got to cover at one time, and tractors and that kind of stuff. It may not be, if you're just walking through the field and you're using a weed eater, then, you don't need all that kind of stuff. But when prepping a new orchard, I will hire a laser leveler to set my slope, regardless of irrigation type, because I want the winter rains to flow off the field, not just for the slope of the summer irrigation, but for the winter as well. Sloping prevents wet pockets that will potentially kill the trees, and especially if the soil types are heavy and hold water. Usually I'm putting in a 1 to 2% grade depending on soil type and crop and length of run. Alfalfa, for example, needs a steeper grade to avoid standing water, which can kill it. It needs to get on and get off, especially in our area where it's hot. If you let that water sit and we get 100, what did we have this last summer, 115 or something like that, the high temperature? That water in there, if it sits, will kill that alfalfa. And, of course, it'll do the same thing to trees. And in the winter, if it sits, it'll kill the roots too. So this just is, we hired this guy to come in. We don't have this kind of equipment. He laser leveled our ground. If you're familiar with that, they set up a little thing that shoots a laser, and then you can just, on your tractor, it reads it here, and it just adjusts your bucket precisely where you want that dirt to cut and fill. Used to be we did it with old graders, and we'd stake it with red and green, red and blue markers for cuts and fills, and you had to physically look at the stake and try to cut and fill and match that. This just puts it down to the perfect. This is just a picture of showing you an example. This is one of our fields. We just were putting in our vegetable beds, and we had a heavy rain, and so we need that rain to get on and get off. And of course, we don't want it sitting there. It's not good for the vegetable ground either. And so we have our drain here. It's a low ground here. We just haven't cut it out. But that's just to give you an example of what can happen in the wintertime too, not just to get our summer irrigation off. This is an example of root. A heavy root stock we're using now. This is called a Crimps 86, and it's a plum peach hybrid kind of thing. And it's really vigorous, real strong, real nice root stock. We're kind of going to this type now. So I do most of my tree planting prep in the fall, after harvest, before the winter rains. I want to have a crumbly, dry soil when I do this, so it airs it out and doesn't pack. For replants with an existing orchard, I will backhoe out dead trees and roots in a 4 to 5 foot hole or deeper and add whatever dressing I have or I consider needed at that time. In my case, we utilize horse manure and perfect blend. My wife has horses, so that really works well. You can get horse manure most any place around, it seems like. Perfect blend is another compost fertilizer I use, real high-quality compost, or something of that nature. If you have determined any other types of amendments you need, this will be a good time to incorporate them. I add this material in as I backfill the hole and then let it rest, allowing biological processes to take place and soil to settle until planting time. This pre-plant prep makes the planting process and timing much easier when I'm ready to plant a tree. And I want to emphasize this. People call me and they want to plant trees and they want to do all this amendments and they want to fix it up perfect and all that stuff. And I'm thinking, you're doing that now? This is like 4 months ahead of time before I'm ever going to plant a tree. Or maybe if I'm doing an orchard, it might be 2 years. So then when I'm ready to put my tree in, I just wait for the right weather. Boom, got it in. I will not plant trees until later, in late winter or early spring when the soil and weather is right for bare root trees, not too wet. The exception is potted trees. I like to plant those in the fall, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Realize I'm describing my situation. I'm in California, and I'm telling you what I do. So plan for the trees you want. I keep this in mind when planting a new orchard, sometimes 2 years in advance. I usually have an estimate of trees I need each year and put in an order for that ahead of time. That's just for replants. A lot of times I have trees that have died. I got to replant them. But I got to get my order in early. If I wait to put it in order in the fall for spring planting, I may need to wait another year if the nursery doesn't have surplus. Most nurseries are planting to order now, not just speculating on sales. Used to be, you just call them up. Oh, yeah, we got extra trees. Nursery guys are not doing that so much. If you want trees, you got to order them, and it takes sometimes a year to get them. They'll plant them a year ahead of time, maybe two. When I grew nursery stock, it took me 2 years to produce a tree. So I'd plant my root stock, and then I'd bud it in the fall, and then I'd grow that on another year on that bud, and then I'd harvest it next year. So it took a couple years to do it. They're getting quicker now, but sometimes they're doing tissue culture and all that kind of stuff. Let's see. So throughout the winter and spring, I prune trees. This is my daughter Elise doing some pruning. And this is some weed control I'm doing with a flamer. I found this to be helpful at very specific times. Usually after harvest, after the first, I'm going to go back one here, just two actually. So I didn't explain this slide here, right here. So I want to just kind of go back to this a minute. This is my way of getting a nice big loose ground for my trees. And I'm taking, this doesn't show everything we're doing, but this is horse manure. We just dig a hole, then we kind of estimate how much we want. This is what I call my dressing. So I'm using whatever I've got, and this is what I've got. Plus I use the high compost fertilizer. And then if I've determined that, hey, I need, in your analysis of things where I'm pulling soil samples and doing tree analysis, I do that in July, and I'll get to that a little bit later, to kind of give me an idea what I need to be doing in my soils. And I need to do a little something here. I'll do it here, and I'll just add my material in, and we just mix that in as we backfill that hole. And we just take that backhoe, and we just kind of go like this and just loosen it up. When I get down, it looks like like you just dug a big grave out there, and it's mounded up. Probably sits, maybe this high off the ground. And so by letting it sit, I don't want to plant a tree right then. Everything's kind of raw, and it's just, and then the rain, it'll settle. If I plant it then, it'll settle. I might be planting in a hole by the time the rain settles. So I like the winter rains to settle that hole, let it settle the ground and kind of tighten up, and then when I plant my tree, I know right where it's going to go. So that kind of makes a nice deal there. So where am I now? So okay, here we are.
And the dressing is what again?
Well, in my case, it's horse manure, and then I use a real high quality egg laying chicken manure compost. I think I'm going to get into that a little bit later, and I'll touch on that a little bit, and some other things I'll touch on. So this is in this case. Let's see, where am I? So I'm talking about burning weeds. It says, I've found this to be helpful at very specific times, usually after harvest, after the first rain, before the leaves fall, although I've had good success at other times when the conditions were right in later winter. I use this in my walnut orchard next to the trees, partly because of the need to have a clean orchard floor for the harvest of walnuts. Controlling perennial weeds is expensive and not as effective with this method. I found this to be an effective for annuals just after the weeds sprout, before the true leaves start, and there is no fire hazard. The heat will damage the tree leaves, so after harvest, this is not as critical. So this is very specific. In the wintertime is usually when I've done it, but if you're trying to burn weeds with any kind of either a flamer or any kind of chemical weed control, even there's organic chemical weed control you can use. You know, there's materials out there, you probably heard them, like Suppress is one I can think of. It's an acid. But you can mix it with like a oral boost, an orange oil, or some kind of oil, and it'll burn the leaves. But even if you're doing that, you know, you wait for the true leaves to show up or the roots to get established, and you're not going to kill that thing very easy. So if you just, I like that, and it's not perfect because not every year is the same. You get a first rain after harvest, because we want this floor to be clean when we pick walnuts up. It's a little bit of a balancing act because we put a cover crop in here and we got to work it down by the time we get to harvest. But we try to keep it clean next to the trees, and that just, as soon as those things start to sprout before the leaves come down, you go through with that, and it looks almost like my neighbors think I'm doing conventional farming because it looks so nice. It looks like a regular clean orchard. In this case, now I'm going to talk a little bit about this. This is our potted trees. We did this one year, and I've done several. But the thing with potted trees I found, at least in our area, is we like to put them in the fall. If you use a bare root tree, that's okay in the spring because it makes direct contact with the clay and the soil right away. It's in that dirt. When the roots start, they get right into the parent soil. If you're going to use a potted plant, by putting it in October in our area, we're getting it started as a winter rains start. And that tree can still be growing and get established into the clay before it goes dormant. And it's not going to be starving for water in the heat of the spring when you just plant that thing and it's just trying to suck water out of the ground. All it's going to get the water is out of that little pot right there until those roots get into the clay. So it takes some time for that to get established. In the fall, we'll kind of nurse it a little bit, maybe give it one or two, but since it's going dormant, it gets into the ground and it gets established. And then in the spring, it's just ready to go. When the heat comes and the moisture's there, you're not have to worry about irrigating that thing when the summer heat is coming on. It's just already moving into the soil. So that's the difference between this pot and planting bare root in the spring or in the fall. As soon as I get back from this conference, I'm ready to plant. We've had some nice dry weather. I'm ready to put trees in the ground. So I'm going to probably, all of that work I just showed you, that's all been done. All that backhoe, all my amendments and everything is, and I'm just going to, now the ground's ready, I'm going to put that in. This is a little bit about pruning. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about pruning this afternoon, pruning and grafting. But I wanted to touch on this in case you're not going to be in that class because this does pertain to orcharding. So for early pruning techniques, I use a 30 to 36 inches for the trunk, and then a 3, 6, 8 pattern for my scaffoldings. And I'll go through that with you, which I will explain, yes, some now, so if you're not in my pruning and grafting class, so I'm just repeating myself. When I first plant the tree, I will prune all the limbs off and cut the tree off about 30 to 36 inches. This will form the trunk. After the first year's growth, as you see here, I will select 3 main scaffolds or branches. What's that? No, you're going to have to adapt to what you want. I'll explain that in a little bit. It's not for all kind of trees. There's differences, a lot of different trees. I'll kind of go through that. So after the first year's growth, as you see, so I'll select these 3 main scaffolds and cut them back. The first few years, my intention is to form the tree. You can prune it longer in length, and it will produce earlier fruit, but it may not be as strong of an initial framework. So here you can see I planted this orchard. You can't quite see the top of the tree, but I'm out there just cut. So I just take everything off. And one of the reasons is because you want that, as that top size, this has all been pruned. You cut that out of the ground on the bare root tree, and you want this, as the top tries to grow, you want it to be balanced. So by taking these limbs off, they're not trying to grow draw from the roots that aren't in the soil yet. So, and then also by cutting them all off, it's going to produce a scaffold that's fairly balanced, and it's all going to grow at the top generally right here, as you can see. So this is what happened. I cut it off, and then that's where I cut it, and then this grew out. You can't see the top of the tree. They're probably, 5, 6, 8, 10 feet long or whatever it is. And so then I'm selecting, this is the same tree. And all I did here was just cut it right here. Boom. That's one cut. And then I have these 3 left. 1, 2, 3. Balanced around there. And now I cut this a little bit short. I look at this tree and I'm going, I probably should have cut it a little longer. But the reason I did that is because I'm trying to get these trees to move outward and make an open vase. And as I'll show you in the next slide here, as we move through this process. So that's one. So if you want a lower crotch, say for example, this tree, came out of the nursery, and it's only this tall right here. You didn't have anything more. And some of those potted plants I get, they aren't full height. They're not where I want them to be. So I'll plant them, and even though I cut them off here, I'm still going to, when it grows next year, boom. I'm not going to cut it like this. I'm going to cut it off again because I want that trunk right there. I don't want it down here. So I'm going to let this tree, even though it might have pushed out here and pushed out there and everything else, and it grew up, say if it was only here in the nursery, I'll let it come all the way up wherever it's going to go, and I'll cut it again. So it might take another year, if it's a small tree, to get my trunk that I want. But in this case, this is my little orchard out here. It's pushed good, and I'm just taking what I want. So that's kind of what that's about. So the next year, you'll see here, I'm continuing the framework, and I select 6 limbs, plus or minus, to continue the structure of the tree. 2 from each of the 3 limbs a year before, gradually opening the tree. The next year, I will select limbs from those to make 8 to 10 limbs for my main structure. In this process, I keep in mind to encourage the growth and direction of my main primary limbs. I will generally not select secondary limbs from those primaries below my shoulder. Some because those will be in the way of tractor tires and harvesters as we move through the field. Also, if the secondaries are encouraged too soon, they will draw strength from the primaries. As the tree continues up to its full height, I will rope and eventually put a galvanized tree wire around the whole tree to keep it from breaking and falling apart as it loads up with fruit. So again, I'll be talking about this a little more. So I'm going to kind of look. So here's my next. So here's those 3. This isn't the same tree, but I'm just telling you. So those where I cut it. So this is what happened to it. I cut them here, boom, 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 and here's what happened next year. These go up, 10, 12 feet tall or whatever they are. And so then I've got a lot of limbs there. What am I going to do? You start standing with that tree, and you're going to walk around it 3 or 4 or 5 times, and you can say, I'm tired of this. I'm going to go to the next tree. Because I can figure what to cut. But so if you have an idea, you're going to know what to do. So in my case, I'm selecting 2 off those 3. So here's my 3, here's my 6. Now, there might be 7 in there because that was a little bit too low, and I didn't want to cut everything off because you need to leave. I don't worry too much about these little dinky things that are underneath in here. I'm just mainly, if you leave too much of these secondaries, these low ones, like I said, early, then you're going to rob the strength from your main structure of your tree, and these are going to take it, and they're going to go off here somewhere. And your little main one's going to piddle out, and it's not going to have any strength. So you need, when it's early, you need to focus that growth into the main structure of the tree that you want to keep. I don't know if you can see that well enough on here. Maybe it doesn't show up very good, but this is the next year. So this is the 2nd leaf. This is my 3rd leaf. So now here's my 6 that I took off of there with a bunch of other stuff in there. And so here's the 6. You can see they go up this far. There's 6 of those. And then I'm taking 8 off of those and keep my scaffold, my open. This is an open vase style. So you asked a question about for all trees. No. I've got another pruning style for walnuts, and I'm working on a different pruning style on my prunes now, not this same one. This is pretty standard for what I'm doing here. And peaches. Peaches you might not leave as much main scaffolds, but you can. So then eventually, as it gets up to full height, I'm going to rope and wire it, put a rope around it. So because these will still be soft enough that they're going to come open if you don't, because you got gravity, of course, and then you got fruit. So here's my third leaf right there. So then so in the winter and early spring, when planting trees, I'm just digging a hole with shovels big enough to place the tree, because I've already done my major tree hole prep earlier in the fall. In the case of a whole field, all our deep ripping and soil prep is done ahead of time, like you saw with that big rig I showed you. At planting time, I'm just fine-tuning nutrients and using a well-placed, high-quality compost fertilizer, as well as beneficial soil bacteria mixed with liquid compost tea. I'm currently using Perfect Blend compost, which you can get various. It's a 444, 442, which also has mycorrhizae bacteria as well. And I use an 819 bacteria blend from Growth Products, and from Converter Organics, a 321 compost tea. There are many types of these available, and it doesn't need to be these. In my case, so let me just talk about that a little bit. So I'm just adding a little bit more at this time. It's not a big deal, but just to give it an extra boost, I add I mix it's a powder. It's the 819 comes with a charge of kelp and molasses and some food for the bacteria, and it's a what's the bacteria? Well, it's the mycorrhizae in the compost, but this other bacteria is Bacillus subtilis, strains of Bacillus subtilis, beneficial bacteria for the soil. I'm trying to just add biology to my ground as I plant, and then of course the 321 is just a compost tea, comes with a liquid. I just kind of do a mild 1% solution of that. So I'm just adding that a little bit as I plant the tree. I'll explain the tree planting a little bit. So in my case, I place the strongest roots to the southeast because of prevailing winds in our area. So our strong winds come from the southeast. And so I put my strong root in the ground, if I can, as I'm planting it, to that direction, and it comes from the north. So that'll help strengthen the tree when the wind blows, the strong roots on that area. I put the curvature of the bud union to the west to minimize sunburn, and generally plant the tree the same ground level as the nursery. Then I cut the tree off at the level I want my first limbs for tree scaffolding to develop, like we showed earlier, and completely whitewash the tree to prevent sunburn. So here you can see I've got a couple different fields in here. This is flat. This is we ran our berms up with a bedder, and we put drip line in the ground right with the bedder. And here's a little planting board. So once we have that tree stake in the ground, we use this planting board because when you start digging your hole, you pull your stake out, you don't know where your tree goes. So we just made this little planting board. We pull the stake, put one stake over here, add another stake over here. So when we dig our hole and we place our tree, we have that middle notch. That tree goes right back where that notch is. Then when you have your trees all planted, they're exactly where the stakes were. You don't have a crooked row running out there. So that's a little simple tool we use. Some people use GPS mechanized planters now. They just drive along, you plug the tree in, it just shanks them in the ground. It's quick. They can plant, hundreds of acres. We're pretty old style, shovels and stuff like that. Some people use an auger, on the back of a tractor on the PTO. Those work if your ground's in good condition, you're not too wet. The thing I don't like about those, sometimes if your ground's wet, it'll create a sheen in there, and then your roots can't penetrate it unless you break it all up. It helps with the labor, but shovel. You can do quite a few trees with a shovel pretty quick if you're just getting with it. You're not dilly-dallying around. My wife and I used to just go out and I don't know how much. I have to calculate it every year because we have so many trees. I got to figure out how long is it going to take me to plant them, and what I got. What's my next project after that? So we kind of try to calculate what it takes to put a tree in. So here you can just see we're adding some of the compost tea. We're planting the tree. This is a school. The school, local Advent school, comes out sometimes, and we just do what we're doing. And this time they came out, we showed them how to plant a tree and how to prune. And so the kids just there, and it's pretty neat. They're learning some skills about how to plant a tree. So that's a little bit about that picture. How we doing on time? What's our? So, just checking our time. Ooh, we're getting close. So, yeah. So, whitewashing is important to prevent sunburn, which can cause secondary troubles with insect damage. These trees, meaning the trees where I'm planting, are coming out of the nursery from close quarters, and then being placed in as a single tree in full sunlight. So they need some protection the first year or two, or maybe more, depending on how your growth is and problem. A water-based latex paint is adequate. But for organic methods, I use a material called Surround, which is kaolin clay. And most whitewashes, that's what's in whitewash, is kaolin clay. It's just they use stickers to stick it to the wall or stick it to your trees. Now, in this case, because of organics, one year we had an inspector come out and said, "What's that on your tree?" And I said, "Well, that's whitewash." And she said, "Oh, you can't use that." I thought, "Oh, wow, that's great." So we had to make our own paint. But if you're not tied to some organic rule, then latex paint, whitewash is fine. It works good and it sticks to the tree, and it really doesn't. In my opinion, there's no big deal about it. But if you have to follow a certain rule, that's what it is.
So the Surround you're using is especially it has some kind of adhesive to it.
No. That's why I say I didn't mention it. I mix it with a sticker like New Film P or some kind of sticker that's organically approved or that kind of thing. So the problem with that is I try to put it on after the winter rains. You could whitewash about any time as long as it's going to dry. In fact, we whitewash right after the tree's planted, generally because if you whitewash clear to the top and the buds are already starting to push, you're going to knock them off. And that's the other thing. When you handle that tree, you need to be careful you don't knock those new buds off. Even the little ones might be pushing at the time. And when you whitewash, that's why we try to whitewash right away, because you can paint that tree and it's not too big of a deal breaking them off. So we put it on after the winter rains because it does not stay on as well as a regular paint. So this just shows you my a picture of. So I had a friend of mine just a few weeks ago. I thought he might be in this class. He's here. He sent me this picture. He says, "Hey, what's the matter with my tree? What's getting into my tree?" And I'm thinking, "Oh, yeah, you didn't whitewash it." So he didn't whitewash it. So you got sunburn, and you got insect infected, and that's what happens. So by whitewashing it like this, you're going to help protect that tree because it doesn't have that, it's like you going out in the sun, taking your shirt off and what's going to happen, first burn of the year, it's like, ooh, yeah. Well, that's like these little trees. They need some whitewash. They need some sunscreen. That's what they're getting. So this is my granddaughter, and this is a generational activity. I did this when I was a kid. My kids did it, and my grandkids are doing it. It's just, it's a neat deal because, where else do you get to go out there and paint and get sloppy and make a mess and have fun,
Is there any trees that you don't whitewash? Certain type or citrus too?
So this would be a good time to take questions. He's asking, is there any certain type of tree that I don't whitewash? Not my fruit trees. If I'm planting an orchard or anything like this, I whitewash them. I can't, maybe an ornamental. I don't know. I don't grow citrus and stuff like that, so I don't really know. But generally, if there's a chance of getting sunburn out of a nursery, I'd paint them. Yeah.
Is that just the young trees, or when they're mature, you actually whitewash the more mature?
So you're asking if it's just the young trees or when they're more mature? No, just the young trees. Once they get a hardy bark, it's the same thing conventionally. If you want to, not that you're into that so much, but a lot of people put a tree protector on them. It's a cover. It's a little sleeve, and they advertise their tree, like Dave Wilson or Shara Gold or whoever Fowler, and a lot of that's more for Roundup protection because when the trees are young, it'll absorb that herbicide and hurt the tree. But it'll act as a sunburn protector too, except sometimes it acts as you go in there's yellow jackets and there's other things hide in there too. Or if it comes off, then your tree's not protected. Anyway, somebody else have a question? So I'll take some time for questions now because I think we're going to take a break here pretty soon. Is that right? Well, I've got 15 minutes for a few questions, or I can go to the next slide. Yeah.
So if you have a sunburned tree like that, can you save it, or you just replant?
So if I have a sunburned tree like this, can I save it or just replant it? Well, early on like that, it's going to have scars larger as it grows. I would probably try to work with this tree. I would paint it and try to keep it if it's not if it's got some viability on the other side. If it's really hurt it, and this has insect damage in it as well. So it'll help prevent a little bit of that more again. The insects, it tends to, we found that when we did nursery stock, I can't remember if we would bud trees right about here. So we'd grow our rootstock, put it in the ground in the fall, let it grow, it would root in the soil, and then we'd push the whole tree. It would grow whole tree that summer. And then we would bud it right here. And that's where the insects would come in right there. And so if we whitewash that tree, that whitewash helped prevent even that insect from coming in there, even on those young trees. But they get that one bud, and they kill that one bud, you kill the whole tree. Because we bud in the fall. You put the bud in, and you put a bud in right here, and then you'll cut the top clear off. Once that heals over, and before the spring growth starts, you'll cut it clear off here, and that bud will push, and it makes your new tree with your fruit wood. I don't know, but yeah, that's just a little side story. Yeah. Yeah.
We went to the Grandma White tree planting method, a lot of similarities here, but you don't have that rock layer. Have you ever experimented with the?
No, so you're asking about the Grandma White tree planting, and I've read some of those things, and I have a mixed opinion about I don't want to put rocks in my field personally, because I go back and rip my ground. I got a bunch of rocks once I plant. So I'm talking several years of orchards. I go back and put another. I'd have rocks in my field then. Maybe that's not a big deal. A few rocks. But I don't know if that's the big issue. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I've looked at some of those accounts and I think, well, this works. And you look at what I'm getting out of these trees, it's incredible. So, I'm not thinking I'm doing something that's wrong by not putting a rock in there. Yeah.
At what point do you start getting production?
These trees, this field here, I picked, we hand-picked some early before we machine pick, probably in the third leaf, but probably fourth leaf is when we might start machine picking, because the trees are young. We worry about skinning the trees with a harvester. So walnuts, we kind of, I think we started after, similarly, third leaf, we start picking some. The fourth leaf on, we're probably doing with machine pick, even at that point, yeah. Yes?
I guess if you're planning on putting in an orchard, is that assuming you're going to go to market? I mean, you're planting so many trees that you're planning on marketing it, or can I and my wife plant an orchard and feed our family?
So you're wondering if in my case, I'm planning for market. You're wondering if you could plant an orchard for feed your family. Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. You can, in my opinion, you got to be careful. You can plant trees, you're going to be spending money and time, and you're not going to eat everything. I mean, you're going to get so much. I mean, I've got a little backyard. That's the neat thing about peaches. Prunes, you can't do that, but you can plant pluots. So you have, peaches will produce from May until September. And we just plant or we graft. In your case, I don't want a whole tree of peaches at one time. So I'll graft 2 or 3 varieties on one tree. And then I get nectarines, and I get another few weeks, I'll get another kind, all on one tree. Because you get one tree and it produces, several hundred pounds, and you're going, oh man, I can't. They're just all over the ground. You're trying to give them to your neighbors, whatever, unless you're going to put them up and eat them all the time, or you sell them. But yeah, in my case, I'm looking for production, because I'm going to try to maximize my production, and I'm going to sell these. And if you don't get that many you in your backyard, you're just going to, I've seen people, I'm going to plant a whole bunch of trees. I'm thinking, oh, great. You're going to be working and spending a bunch of money, and then what are you going to do with all the fruit? Unless you got a plan for it, And, of course, it's nice to see all the fruit, but pretty soon you're thinking, my down street, my neighbor's the same way. He planted a bunch of trees out there, and now they're all dead and dilapidated and whatever else, because he couldn't take care of them, and it gave him too much. So planting a few of what you need, or if you're going to market them. You know, if you're going out there for the romance, pretty soon you're going to be discouraged. You know, yeah, if you can, it's going to produce a lot. One tree will can produce a lot of fruit. Yeah.
Just a comment, in Maine, we've got 20 apple trees that are meeting rootstock. We took out 80 bushels this last year off of 20 trees. And, you know, it's a lot.
Yeah. So it depends on what you're going to do. You know, you could take it to the market, but if you got another job and you're just thinking, wow, you know, you might as well just plant what you want to eat, you know, or a little bit. Yeah. Go ahead.
The damaged tree there from the sunburn, isn't that scar going to be there most of the life of the tree? So it's handicapped for the...
Yeah, you're wondering about this picture of the damaged tree with the scar. Yes, that's true. That's why you want to whitewash, and then your question about what to do with the tree. Yeah, you know, it might heal and it might come around because in another pic farther on, I don't have time to show it, we get what we call gall on walnuts, if you're familiar with that, walnut crown gall. And it's like a cancer on the tree or on the trunk around the base. And we carve that out of there, and we chisel it, and we burn it, and we so it takes the gall feeds on the main tree. So you got to almost surgery, you take that out. And it'll eventually, unless it's too big, it'll eventually heal over and close up if you got it all. But in a case like this, when they're young, it's hard to overcome that damage. That's why I'm emphasizing whitewash the trees when they're young. Yes.
You mentioned wiring or putting rope around once you get up a certain height there. Do you have any pictures or anything of exactly what you've done for that? And I'm also thinking about one of the challenges that I have with trees are birds.
So you're asking about whether I have pictures of tying the trees with wire rope, and then you have something called burrs?
I was just thinking about birds.
Oh, birds.
Because one of the things, if you're up there doing something and you're trying to get a tree to be a certain, width and so forth, do you do anything, in terms of protecting? I know in a large orchard it's hard to do, but if you've just got a few trees, protecting them from, birds.
From birds.
Really from getting in and getting on quickly.
Okay. With a lot of orchard, it's not as bad because you have, your birds don't do quite a bit. But if you have, like in my case, what I do about birds, cherries are a problem. So we've got cherry trees. Cherry trees will get 30 feet tall or bigger. And so, those are close to my house more so because I don't have a cherry orchard. And so I'm a little more watchful of those. I don't worry about the birds taking too much off the top. But if I'm really protective, I'll go after the birds. I've used nets, but it's hard to do. And so I just let the birds take some and I get some. And usually I get enough off the bottom. The only problem is now I'm pruning my trees short for my backyard use. And I've got some pictures in my grafting class, pruning class of what I'm doing with those trees and why. And so I'm just taking, so that's a problem. If you have a short tree, the birds are going to get the short ones too, And so I'm after them, We used to have a little outside sleeping area, and I'd just take my shotgun out there with me, and they come in the morning, and I'd go after them. And the crows are smart, and blue jays. You can usually keep the crows out because they're big, and blue jays will come in and they're in, they're gone, in and gone all day long, and it's going to be a problem. I don't know, unless somebody, there's big companies that use these bird eyes and owls, and those might work. I don't know. I've done some work with those, but after a while they just know what they are, and you got to move. So they do noise things that put off a noise to try to keep them out, and I'm not sure.
What about hanging reflective stuff?
Reflective tape. Some people have done that. I don't know. I've never really have a lot of knowledge about that. Yeah. Work good for you? Okay. So there you go. Maybe it works okay with that reflective tape. Question in the back? Oh, yeah. So at a certain point, the tree, talking about when to put rope and wire, at a certain point, your tree's going to get the height you want. And that's why I try to focus my main limbs, because that's where you want to put my rope is usually when the tree's not fully developed, but it's still going to pull a pretty heavy load. and you don't want it to fall apart before you get a wire on it. And so maybe after 5, say 6 years or so, then you kind of got your structure, and then we'll go with a galvanized tree wire. I don't think it's a 16 or I can't remember what gauge it is, but it's soft, and we take a string a roll out the end. It comes on a big roll. We put it on a reel, and we'll pull it down, and we just take a ladder and we'll go around the tree. Usually you put it through a stake with a loop in it so you can kind of get it where you want it and come around and go back up the ladder and tie it. And then you just kind of keep it stays there the life of the tree. The limbs will go right into the wire, and I haven't had to wire it more than just that one time. If the tree is real heavy like peaches, sometimes 2 wires, it wants to break early and you go bigger, because we used to machine harvest peaches and we didn't have to worry about how big they got. We just let them get real big, as long as they weren't bigger than the ladder. Yeah.
Where I live, they put these stakes to hold up the limbs when it has heavy fruit on it.
That's right. Yeah, and I don't like that personally. I hate propping and putting props out and put them back in. So if I can get my tree balanced, the downside is when the whole tree starts to lean, that's when I would use a prop. Not for each individual limb, but this time of year we've had to go back and prop. We had some heavy rain early. The leaves were on the tree. The winds blew, and it moved. Some of them laid them clear over. And so you have to get out there. We prop them back up, and we try to get them to reroot. Some of those, that's hard to recover some of those if they've gone down too much. That's why we try to put that root. And we like this new rootstock. This new rootstock, it's like almost bulletproof. You just put that tree in there, and it stays there. It's just like in the ground. And that's a neat deal. So that's the thing with rootstocks, and I think I'll get into that a little more in my pruning and grafting class. But
do you thin out the fruit so that the development won't be good?
yeah, so you were asking if I thin the fruit? On peaches, yes. Yes, and I'll talk a little bit more of that on pruning, but yeah, generally I would say most people that aren't used to thinning don't thin enough. You need to take off a lot of fruit to get your fruit to size on peaches. Yeah.
Do you have a problem with peach curl?
Yeah, the question is, do I have a problem with peach curl? Yes. And I think I'll get into that a little bit here in the next slide. No, this is walnuts. But yeah, pest control, I'll talk about pest control. Yeah, there's several things we can use, depending on what you want to do with your deal. Coppers, we use a material called parasitic acid. It's just a bactericide, kills pretty quick. So copper is probably one of the main ones we use for that, but there's others. I usually just put on once in the winter. This is about now. When I get back from this conference, I'll put on them. Yeah. Yes.
If you grew apples and pears, would you prune them differently?
If I prune apples and pears, would I prune them differently? Yes. Generally, it depends. I mean, depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to fill with an open vase, I probably do pretty much the same. But they want to grow straighter and narrower. So you have to generally cut them to get them like cherries. I do more bench cuts, which now I'm kind of advising against bench cuts in some cases. But you do more bench cuts. You're trying to cut it to move that tree to move wider, more open, because you've got space to fill. If you don't have to fill that much space, if you're just doing a backyard, I start to plant my stuff 10 feet apart, and you could probably plant them closer if you prune them differently. Prune them straight up like a Christmas tree. So there's different ways you can prune them. But a cherry tree wants to grow big. Apples too. So I generally prune them the same, kind of open them up because I've got room generally. But if I'm doing a narrow spacing, I won't prune them. I'll let them go straighter and not quite so open. And I'm favoring more of an erect pruning style, just because of this open vase style tends to need wiring and propping and opens up more. It exposes more of the limbs to sunburn and stuff like that when the afternoon sun. So anyway, that's just so. I don't know if I answered your question. Yes and no. Yeah, we do central leader somewhat on this new pruning style I'm doing is more of a, but I do 3 rather than 1 on that open. 3 central leaders, 3 or 4. Yeah. So anyway, I think we're out of time here. Need to take a break anyway. At 10:15, is that when our next class starts? 10:30. 10:30. So we'll take a break and then we'll come back and take a look at this again.